Call him, someone said, and the room went quiet in a way that didn't make sense for a place that was supposed to save lives. I remember the sound first, the steady, mechanical beeping somewhere above me, too fast, too sharp, like it was trying to outrun something. My eyes wouldn't open at first. My body felt heavy, like I'd been dropped 10 feet underwater and forgot how to swim. I tried to breathe deeper, but it came out shallow, uneven. Cold air brushed against my skin, carrying that sterile hospital smell, bleach, plastic, something faintly metallic. I wasn't supposed to be here. That was the first clear thought that cut through the fog. I didn't come here to be saved. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. My fingers twitched against the rough fabric beneath me, and that's when I realized I was lying on a narrow bed. Not my bed. Not anywhere familiar. Voices moved around me, quick, controlled, but tense underneath. Vitals are unstable, one said. She came in alone, another replied, softer, like that detail mattered more than anything else. Alone. The word echoed in my head, heavier than it should have been. I forced my eyes open just enough to catch blurred shapes, bright lights overhead, shadows moving back and forth, someone adjusting something near my arm. I wanted to ask what was happening, but my voice didn't come. It stayed trapped somewhere in my chest. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. Did you make the call? A pause. Just a second. Long enough to feel wrong. Yes. Good. The beeping grew louder in my ears, or maybe everything else just faded away. I tried to turn my head, but it felt like lifting 100 pounds. Something wasn't right. Not just with me, but with them. Hospitals weren't supposed to sound like this. Not controlled fear. Not hesitation. Not anticipation. I blinked harder, forcing the world into focus, and caught a glimpse of a nurse standing near the doorway. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking out into the hallway, like she was waiting. Everyone was waiting. For who? My throat burned as I tried again to speak, a whisper barely forming. Where, it didn't come out right. My lips felt numb. No one answered. No one even looked at me. The room wasn't about me anymore. That realization settled in slowly, like a chill spreading through my chest. I was the one on the bed. I was the one struggling to breathe. But whatever was happening right now, it wasn't about saving me. It was about something else. Footsteps echoed faintly from outside, slow, deliberate, each one measured like it carried weight. The nurse straightened. One of the doctors stepped back without being told. No alarms went off. No one rushed. They just made space. And somehow, without seeing him yet, I knew. Whoever they called wasn't a doctor. And for the first time since I walked into that hospital alone, fear didn't come from what was happening inside my body. It came from the door. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and the silence that followed felt heavier than anything before it, like the entire floor was holding its breath, and then the door opened without urgency, without noise, just a quiet shift of space that made everyone in the room straighten at once, and I forced my eyes to focus even though they burned, even though every part of me wanted to close them again and disappear, but I could not. Not when something in the air had changed so completely, and then I saw him, tall, composed, older than I expected, his presence not loud but absolute, like gravity had entered the room, pulling everything toward him without effort, his silver hair catching the overhead light, his expression calm in a way that did not belong in a place like this, and no one spoke when he stepped inside, not the doctors, not the nurse, not even the machine seemed as loud anymore, and I felt it then, that shift, that invisible line where control had moved from them to him. And I did not understand why, I did not understand how, but I felt it as clearly as the cold against my skin. His eyes moved once across the room, assessing, calculating, and then they landed on me, and for a moment everything narrowed, the lights, the sounds, the movement, all of it fading until there was only that gaze, steady, unreadable, and something inside my chest tightened, not pain, something deeper, something older, like recognition. That I could not explain, and I swallowed, forcing my voice to work, barely more than a breath. Who are you? It came out broken, fragile, nothing like the question I meant to ask, but he heard it. I knew he did because his expression shifted just slightly, not softer, not kinder, just focused, and he stepped closer, slow, deliberate, every movement controlled, and no one stopped him, no one even tried. A doctor opened his mouth like he might speak, then closed it again, stepping back. Instead, and I realized then that whatever authority existed here did not belong to them anymore, it belonged to him, and that realization should have terrified me, but what I felt instead was confusion, sharp and disorienting, because I had walked into this hospital alone, unknown, unimportant, just another patient in need of help, and yet here he was, standing beside my bed like I was something that mattered, something worth interrupting the entire system for. His hand hovered briefly near the edge of the bed, not touching, just there, like he was measuring distance, like he was deciding something I could not see, and then he spoke, his voice low, steady, carrying through the room without force. She stays. That was all, 2 words, but they landed like a decision already made, final, unquestioned, and I saw the nurse nod immediately. The doctor glanced down at the chart without arguing, and my pulse quickened, confusion turning into something sharper, something closer to fear, because this was not normal, none of this was normal, and I did not know him. I was sure of that. I would remember a man like this. And yet the way he looked at me made it feel like he already knew everything, like I was the one who had forgotten something important, something that had just walked back into my life without warning, and as my vision blurred again, the last thing I heard before the darkness pulled me under was his voice, quieter this time, almost to himself. Not again. I woke up to silence, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that feels controlled, like even the air had been told to behave, and for a second I did not move, I just listened, the steady beep of the monitor now. Slower, steadier, matching the rhythm of my breathing, and the first thing I noticed was that the room felt different, emptier but not abandoned, watched but not crowded, and when I turned my head slightly, the effort pulling at every muscle, I saw why. He was still there, sitting in the chair beside my bed like he had never left, like time had rearranged itself around him instead of the other way around, his posture straight, hands resting calmly, eyes on me the moment I stirred, not surprised. Not startled, just aware, and something about that made my chest tighten again, because people do not wait like that for strangers, not like this, not in silence that stretched for what felt like hours. I swallowed, my throat dry, voice rough but clearer than before. You are still here, and it sounded more like an accusation than a question. His expression did not change, but there was a pause, brief and measured, before he answered, yes. Just that, simple, certain, like there had never been another option, and I shifted slightly, the movement slow, careful, testing the limits of my body, the sharp edge of pain dulled now but still there, reminding me I was not imagining any of this. Why? I asked, forcing the word out, because nothing about this made sense, because I needed something to hold on to that was real, and his gaze did not leave mine, not even for a second, because you needed someone here, he said, and the answer should have sounded kind, reassuring even, but it did not. It sounded deliberate, like he had chosen those words instead of the truth, and I could feel it, the gap between what he said and what he meant, and it made my pulse pick up again, not from fear exactly, but from the growing certainty that I was missing something important, something that everyone else in this room already understood. I glanced toward the door, half expecting to see the same doctors, the same urgency from before, but the hallway beyond the glass was quiet, too quiet. For a hospital, no rushing footsteps, no raised voices, just controlled movement, distant and careful, like the entire floor had been cleared, and I looked back at him, my breath catching slightly. What did you do? I asked, because this was not normal, because patients did not get entire hospital wings to themselves, because I had walked in here alone with nothing and somehow ended up at the center of something I did not recognize. His jaw shifted almost imperceptibly, not tension, not hesitation, just acknowledgement. I made sure you would not be disturbed, he replied, and the words settled heavy in the space between us. Not comfort, not protection, something closer to control, and I felt it. Then, Clear and undeniable, this was not just about helping me, whatever this was, whatever I had stepped into, it had rules I did not understand yet, rules he controlled completely, and I tightened my grip on the thin hospital sheet, grounding myself, forcing my thoughts to stay steady. I do not know you, I said, quieter now, but firmer, needing to say it out loud, needing to remind both of us, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression, not surprise, not anger, something deeper, something that flickered for only a second before it was gone. No, he said slowly, his voice lower now, almost reflective, you do not, and that should have ended it, that should have been simple, but the way he said it made it feel like the opposite was also true, like he knew me in a way I could not return, and the silence that followed stretched, heavy and full, until I could not ignore the question anymore, the one that had been building since I opened my eyes. Then why were they so afraid of you? I asked. Because they had been. I saw it, felt it, the way they moved, the way they listened, the way everything changed the second he walked in, and this time he did not answer right away. His gaze shifted briefly, not away from me, but through me, like he was looking at something far older than this room, far older than this moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter, steadier, carrying something that felt like truth whether I wanted it or not, because they know what happens when I decide someone matters. And the words settled into me before I could stop them, heavy, final, and I realized with a clarity that made my chest tighten all over again, I was that someone now. The words settled between us like something permanent, and I felt them linger in the air even after he stopped speaking, heavy in a way I could not ignore, and for a moment I did not know how to respond, because what do you say to someone who decides people matter like it is a choice, like it is power, like it is something that changes the world around them? I swallowed, my fingers tightening slightly against the thin hospital blanket, grounding myself in something real, something simple. I did not ask for that, I said finally, my voice quieter but steadier now, and it was the truth. I did not ask for any of this, not the silence, not the attention, not him, and for the first time since he walked into this room, there was a pause in his certainty, not hesitation, not doubt, just a brief moment where something unspoken passed behind his eyes. And he leaned back slightly in the chair, studying me in a way that felt less like control and more like consideration. No, he said after a second, you did not, and there was something different in his tone now, something that felt closer to acknowledgement than authority, but it did not make me feel safer, it made me more aware, because that meant he knew it too, that whatever this was, it had not started tonight, and that thought settled uneasily in my chest. I shifted again, slower this time, my body responding a little easier than before, the fog lifting just enough for clarity to begin creeping in at the edges, and with it came memory, not clear, not complete, just fragments, flashes of something I could not fully hold on to, the sound of rain earlier, the feeling of walking too fast, of looking over my shoulder even when I told myself not to, of coming here because it was supposed to be safe, because hospitals are supposed to be safe, and yet none of that explained him. None of that explained why he was here, why everyone listened when he spoke, why the entire floor felt like it belonged to him instead of the people who worked here. I let out a slow breath, my gaze lifting back to his. You still have not told me who you are, I said, because that mattered, because names mean something. Because I needed something solid to hold on to in all of this uncertainty, and this time he did not avoid it, did not deflect, his expression remained calm, composed. But there was a weight behind his words when he answered. Victor Moretti, he said, simple, direct, like the name itself carried enough meaning that nothing else was needed, and the moment the words reached me, something shifted, not in the room, not in him, in me, a faint recognition that did not fully form, like hearing a song you almost remember but cannot place, and my breath caught slightly, not because I understood it, but because some part of me felt like I should, and that unsettled me more than anything else. I looked at him, really looked this time, at the lines in his face, the steadiness in his posture, the quiet authority that did not need to be proven, and I shook my head faintly. That does not mean anything to me, I admitted, because it did not. Not completely, and yet it did not feel entirely true either, and for a brief second, something almost like relief flickered across his expression, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced again by that same controlled calm. It does not have to, he replied, and the simplicity of that answer made my chest tighten again, because it sounded like the meaning existed whether I understood it or not, like the truth was already said and I was the only one catching up to it. I glanced down at my hands, at the slight tremor that still had not fully gone away, and then back at him, the question rising before I could stop it. Then why me? I asked, because that was the center of it, the part that did not make sense no matter how I turned it over. Why this room, why this attention, why him? And this time the silence that followed was different, not empty, not controlled, but heavy with something deeper, something that felt like it had been waiting a long time to be said. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but stronger. In a way that settled into my chest immediately. Because you walked into the one place you were never supposed to find, he said, his eyes holding mine without wavering, and you did it alone, and I felt it then, that shift again, not outside, not in the room, but inside me, like something had just moved beneath the surface of everything I thought I understood, and I realized with a clarity that made my breath catch, this was not the beginning of something, it was the moment something hidden had finally caught up to me. The words stayed with me long after he said them, circling in my mind like something unfinished, something I was supposed to understand but could not quite reach, and I felt it again, that quiet pressure building behind my thoughts, like a memory trying to surface but stopping just short, and I shifted slightly against the bed, forcing myself to stay present, to stay here instead of chasing something I could not see. I walked into a hospital, I said slowly, my voice steadier now, holding on to logic like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. That is not something you are not supposed to find, and for a moment, I thought I had something solid, something simple enough to break through whatever this was, but Victor did not react the way I expected. He did not correct me, did not argue, he just watched me, that same calm focus, like he was waiting for me to catch up to something he already knew. And that unsettled me more than anything else, because it meant this was not about the building, not about the place, it was about something else entirely. Something I had not seen yet, and I exhaled slowly, my eyes drifting toward the side of the bed where a small tray rested, a plastic cup, a folded cloth, and something else, something that made my breath catch for just a second, a thin chain, barely visible against the white surface, delicate, simple, and I frowned slightly, reaching toward it before I even realized what I was doing, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. And the moment I touched it, something shifted inside me. Not a full memory, not clear, just a feeling, a sense of familiarity that hit too quickly to ignore, and I picked it up carefully, the chain sliding between my fingers as I brought it closer, a small pendant resting at the center, worn just enough to show it had been held often, and my chest tightened again. Sharper this time, because I knew this, I did not know how, I did not know why, but I knew it. This is mine, I said under my breath, more to myself than to him. And the room seemed to still in response, the silence deepening in a way that felt intentional, and I looked up slowly, meeting his gaze again, and something in his expression had changed, not surprise, not shock, something quieter, something that looked like confirmation, like a question had just been answered without words. Where did you get this? I asked, my voice firmer now, because this mattered, because this was real, and he did not look away, did not hesitate. You brought it with you, he said, and the simplicity of the answer should have ended it, but it did not, because I did not remember bringing it, I did not remember anything clearly enough to explain it, and that gap in my memory felt wrong, too large, too deliberate, like something had been taken out instead of lost, and I tightened my grip slightly around the pendant, grounding myself again. No, I said, shaking my head faintly, I would remember this, and the conviction in my voice surprised even me, because I did not remember much. But I knew I would remember something like this, something that felt this familiar, and for a second, the room seemed to hold that statement, to weigh it, and then Victor leaned forward just slightly, his eyes not leaving mine, his voice lower now, more deliberate than before. You used to, he said, and the words hit differently, not as information, but as something personal, something that reached past the confusion and settled somewhere deeper, somewhere that made my chest tighten again in a way that was harder to ignore. And I felt it then, that pull, that quiet, persistent feeling that there was something here, something between us, something tied to this small piece of metal in my hand that I could not fully see yet, and it scared me, not because of what it was, but because of how close it felt. Like it was right there beneath the surface, waiting for the moment I finally understood, and I swallowed, my voice quieter now, more uncertain than I wanted it to be. Used to what? I asked, and this time the silence that followed was not controlled, it was heavy, layered with something unspoken, something that felt like it had been waiting far longer than tonight, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made it impossible to ignore. Remember me, he said, and the words settled into the space between us, quiet but undeniable, and for the first time since I woke up, the fear that followed was not about where I was, or who he was, it was about what I had forgotten. The words did not echo, they settled, heavy and precise, like they had been waiting longer than I had been awake, and I felt them sink into something deeper than thought, deeper than memory, somewhere that reacted before I could understand why, and my fingers tightened around the pendant without me realizing it, the cool metal pressing into my palm as if it was the only thing anchoring me to the present. That does not make sense, I said, but my voice lacked the certainty it had a moment ago. Because something inside me had shifted, something small but undeniable, like a crack forming in a wall I did not know existed, and I shook my head faintly, trying to push it away, trying to stay grounded in what I knew, in what was real. I would remember you, I added, quieter now, because that was true, it had to be true. A man like him was not forgettable, not his presence, not the way the room changed around him, not the way people listened without question, and yet he did not argue, did not insist, he simply watched me, that same steady gaze, as if he had already heard this before, as if he had expected it, and that realization made my chest tighten again, because it meant this was not new to him, this confusion, this gap, this moment. Memory is not always a choice, he said after a second, his voice calm, almost measured, like he was choosing each word carefully, and I frowned, the meaning settling in slowly, uneasily, because it suggested something I did not want to consider, something I was not ready to accept, and I looked away from him for the first time since I woke up, my eyes dropping back to the pendant in my hand, studying it more closely now, the small details I had missed before, the faint engraving along the edge, worn but still there, and my breath caught again, sharper this time, because it was not random, it was intentional, two initials, barely visible but unmistakable once I saw them, V and E, intertwined in a way that felt deliberate, permanent, and my pulse quickened, not from fear, but from recognition that I could not explain, and I traced the letters lightly with my thumb, my mind reaching for something, anything that would make sense of it, but nothing came, just that same empty space where something should have been, and I looked up again, my voice lower now, more uncertain than I wanted it to be. Why would I have this? I asked, because this was not coincidence, it could not be, and this time he did not answer right away, his gaze shifting briefly to the pendant, then back to me, and there was something different in his expression now, something that felt less controlled, less distant, like whatever this was, it mattered to him in a way he was not hiding anymore. Because you chose it, he said finally, and the words landed differently, not as information, but as something personal, something that carried weight beyond the moment, and I felt it again, that pull, stronger this time, like a thread tightening between something I could not see and something I could not remember, and I shook my head again, more firmly now, trying to break it, trying to hold on to what made sense. No, I said, my voice rising slightly despite myself, I would not choose something I cannot remember, and the frustration crept in then, sharp and sudden, because this was not just confusion anymore, it was a gap that should not exist, a missing piece that felt too important to be gone, and for a moment the room felt smaller, the air heavier, like everything was closing in around that single unanswered question, and then he leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space again without effort, his voice quieter now but stronger in a way that cut through everything else. You did not forget it, he said, and something in the way he said it made my breath catch before I even processed the words, you were made to. And the sentence did not just land, it hit, sharp and immediate, cutting through the confusion and settling into something deeper, something that made my chest tighten in a way that was no longer just uncertainty, because this was different, this suggested something deliberate, something done, and I felt it then, the shift from confusion to something else entirely, something colder, something that carried weight beyond this room, beyond this moment, and I looked at him, really looked, searching for anything that would tell me this was not real, that this was not possible, but his expression did not change, his gaze did not waver, and that was what made it worse, because it meant he believed it, and part of me, the part one could not fully control, believed it too. The words did not fade, they stayed, echoing somewhere deeper than sound, and I felt them settle into me in a way that made everything else feel less certain, less solid, and for a moment I could not breathe the same way, like the air had shifted without warning. Made to, I repeated quietly, the phrase unfamiliar on my tongue, heavier than it should have been, and I looked at him again, searching, not for answers anymore, but for something that would tell me this was not real, that this was not happening. But his expression did not change, and that was what made it worse, because it meant he was not guessing, he was remembering, and that difference pressed against my chest in a way I could not ignore. That is not possible, I said, but the words felt weaker now, less like truth and more like hope, and I tightened my grip around the pendant again, needing something to hold on to, something that was mine, something that had not been taken or changed, but even that felt uncertain now. Because if what he said was true, then even this small piece of metal, carried a history I did not remember, and the thought unsettled me more than anything else. People do not just forget things like that, I added, my voice sharper now, pushing back against the weight of what he was suggesting, and for a second, the room felt smaller again, the silence pressing in closer, and then he moved, not suddenly, not aggressively, just enough to shift the space between us, his presence steady, controlled, and he reached out, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the intent behind it, like he was bridging a distance that had never really existed for him. They do, he said, his voice lower now, quieter, but carrying something that felt heavier than before, something that did not need to be proven because it already existed. When someone makes sure they do, and the words landed differently. This time, not just as an idea, but as something real, something that had happened, and I felt it then, not memory, not yet, but a reaction, a sharp, sudden tightening in my chest that did not come from confusion, it came from somewhere deeper, somewhere instinctive, like my body recognized something my mind could not access, and I inhaled sharply, my fingers loosening slightly around the pendant before tightening again, grounding myself, forcing myself to stay here, to stay present. Who would do that? I asked, and the question came out quieter than I expected, because part of me already knew this was not random. This was not accidental, this was something deliberate, something targeted, and I needed to understand why. And for the first time, Victor did not answer immediately, his gaze shifting slightly, not away from me, but through something beyond this room, like the answer was not simple, like it carried weight he was choosing how to reveal, and that pause told me more than his words would have, because it meant there was an answer, and it mattered, and I swallowed, my pulse picking up again, not from fear alone, but from the growing certainty that I was standing at the edge of something I was not ready to see. Why would anyone do that to me? I asked, and this time the question felt different, more personal, more direct, because this was no longer about confusion, it was about intention, about being chosen, and the idea of that, of someone deciding I needed to forget, settled into me in a way that felt wrong, like something had been taken without permission, and the silence that followed stretched just long enough to make my breath uneven again, and then he looked back at me fully, his expression steady but no longer distant, no longer detached, something deeper breaking through the control he had held since he walked into this room, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made everything else fall away, because remembering me would have put you in danger, he said, and the words hit in a way that was immediate, undeniable, cutting through the confusion and settling into something that felt real. And I felt it then, the shift, not just in understanding, but in everything, because this was not about a missing memory anymore, this was about a reason, a choice, something that had been done for a purpose, and that purpose was tied to him, and I looked at him, my breath catching slightly as the pieces began to move, not fully, not clearly, but enough to change everything, and for the first time since I woke up, the question that followed was not just fear, it was something deeper. Something that carried weight I could not ignore. What are you protecting me from? I asked, and the moment the words left my mouth, I knew, whatever the answer was, it would not let me go back to who I was before this room. The question did not disappear after I asked it, it stayed between us, heavier than anything that had come before, and I felt it settle into the silence like something irreversible, because whatever answer came next was not going to be small, it was not going to be something I could ignore or walk away from. And I watched him carefully, my breath slower now but uneven, waiting, and for the first time since I woke up. Victor did not answer right away, not because he did not know, but because he was choosing how much of it I could hear, and that pause told me everything I needed to understand about the weight of the truth, and my fingers tightened again around the pendant, grounding myself, because something in me already knew this was going to change everything, and when he finally spoke, his voice was lower than before, quieter, but carrying something that felt older than this moment, older than this room. "From everything that comes with me," he said, and the words landed slowly. Not sharp, not sudden, but heavy. Like they had layers I could not see yet, and I frowned slightly, trying to make sense of it, trying to find something clear in something that felt deliberately incomplete. "That is not an answer," I said, my voice steadier now, because I needed clarity, I needed something real, not something that sounded like a warning wrapped in restraint, and for a second, I thought he might refuse, might pull back again into that controlled distance he had held since the beginning, but he did not. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, just enough to shift the space again, just enough to make it clear that what he was about to say mattered, and his eyes held mine in a way that made it impossible to look away. "There are people who pay attention to what matters to me," he said, each word deliberate, measured, "and they do not always see the difference between protection and possession," and the meaning settled in immediately, not as confusion, but as something clearer, something sharper, and I felt it then, the reality of what he was saying, not in detail, not in images, but in implication, in the understanding that being close to him meant being seen, being noticed, being targeted, and my chest tightened again, but this time it was different, not just fear, something more complex, something that carried weight beyond myself, and I shook my head faintly, trying to process it, trying to place it somewhere that made sense. "So you are saying someone would come after me because of you," I said, and the words sounded unreal even as I spoke them, but he did not correct me, did not soften it, he simply held my gaze and nodded once, small but certain, and that was enough to shift everything inside me again, because this was not abstract anymore, this was not just something that had happened in the past, this was something that could still happen, something that was still real, and I inhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm, to stay grounded, because panic would not help me understand this, and I needed to understand it. "Then why am I here?" I asked, the question coming out quieter now, more controlled, because if this place was not safe, if being near him was not safe, then none of this made sense, none of it added up, and for a moment, something in his expression shifted again, not uncertainty, not hesitation, something closer to resolve, like this was the part he had already decided on, and when he answered, his voice carried that same quiet certainty that had defined everything he had done since he walked into this room. "Because this is the only place they will not look for you," he said, and the words settled into me with a weight that made my breath catch slightly, because they carried implication, strategy, intention, and I looked around the room again, really looked this time, at the controlled silence, the empty hallway, the absence of normal hospital chaos, and I realized something I had not fully seen before. This was not just a hospital room, it was something else, something protected, something isolated, something controlled, and I looked back at him, my voice quieter now, almost a whisper. "You turned this place into a hiding spot," I said, and he did not deny it, did not correct it, he simply watched me with that same steady gaze, and that was enough, because it meant I was right, and the realization settled in deeper than anything else so far, because it meant this was not temporary, this was not accidental. This was planned, deliberate, and I swallowed, my grip on the pendant loosening slightly as the weight of it all settled in. And for the first time since I walked into that hospital, I understood something clearly. I was not just a patient here, I was being hidden, and whatever I had forgotten, whatever had been taken from me, it was important enough that someone had decided I could not be allowed to remember it, and someone else had decided I could not be allowed to disappear. The realization did not come all at once. It settled slowly, piece by piece, until it became something I could not ignore, something that pressed against every thought I had, and I sat there in that quiet room, the pendant still in my hand, the weight of everything finally beginning to take shape, and for the first time since I opened my eyes, I was not just reacting, I was thinking, really thinking, about what this meant, about what had been taken from me and what had been left behind, and I looked at Victor again, studying him not as a stranger anymore, but as the center of everything I did not understand. if they erased my memory to protect me, I said slowly, choosing each word carefully, then why am I remembering anything at all? And the question hung there, sharper than anything I had asked before, because it cut through the confusion and reached for something deeper, something that did not fit with the rest of it. And for a moment, I thought he might avoid it again, might redirect or soften it, but he did not. Instead he watched me with that same steady focus, like he had been waiting for me to ask exactly that, and his answer came quieter this time, but heavier, because not everything can be erased, he said, and the words settled into me with a strange kind of clarity, because they felt true in a way I could not explain, like something inside me had always known it, and I looked down at the pendant. Again, the initials worn but still there, the connection undeniable even if I could not fully remember it, and I exhaled slowly, my thoughts shifting, aligning in a way they had not before. So whatever this is, I continued, my voice steadier now, stronger, it is not gone, it is just hidden, and he did not interrupt, did not correct me, which told me I was getting closer, closer to something real, and I felt it then. Not memory, not yet, but direction, like I was finally facing the right way. Even if I could not see the path ahead, and I lifted my gaze back to his, holding it this time without hesitation, then I need to remember, I said, and the words came out before I could stop them, before I could question them, but the moment they left my mouth, I knew they were true, because whatever had been taken from me, whatever had been buried, it mattered, not just to him, not just to whoever had done this, but to me, and that realization settled into my chest with a quiet certainty. That surprised me, and for the first time, something shifted in his expression again, not control, not calculation, something closer to concern, like he had been expecting resistance, fear. Anything but this, and he leaned forward slightly, his voice lower now, more deliberate. Remembering comes with a cost, he said, and there was no warning in his tone, no attempt to scare me, just truth, plain and simple, and I nodded faintly, because I understood that, even without knowing the details, I understood that whatever had been done to me had been done for a reason, and undoing it would not be simple. But I also understood something else, something that felt just as important. So, does not remembering, I replied, my voice quieter but steady, and the silence that followed was different this time, not heavy, not uncertain, but balanced, like something had shifted between us, something that was no longer just about him protecting me or me questioning him. It was something shared now, something that connected us whether I wanted it to or not, and I felt it settle into place, that quiet, undeniable truth. And I looked at him one more time, not as a stranger, not even as someone I did not trust, but as someone tied to a part of my life I could not see yet, and I asked the only question that mattered now, the one that would decide everything that came next. If I remember you, I said slowly, my fingers tightening slightly around the pendant, what happens to me? And for the first time since he walked into that room, Victor did not answer immediately, not because he did not know, but because the answer was not simple. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried something deeper than authority, deeper than control, something that felt almost like inevitability. You do not go back to who you were, he said, and the words settled into me with a quiet finality, and I realized then, whatever I had lost was not just memory, it was a life, and whatever I was about to find was not just truth, it was a choice I could not undo.